Another Dibs research video.
Hey research nerds, how we doing today? I did want to take some time today to talk about really our next goal, which is to survey all of the freshman research students. So we want to get this survey out next week, which means we have a lot of work to do in class as you guys need to prepare a survey to give out. You've got to test that survey. You've got to make sure that you're getting answers in accordance with what you're expecting to see. So let's talk a little bit about what a hypothesis should look like, and then talk a little bit about how to structure your questions in order to be able to answer those hypotheses. So really, this is our first goal. As a reminder, you guys need to have 4 hypotheses, 2 of which need to be finding a relationship between 2 variables, and 2 of which need to be finding a difference between groups. So let's jump in and talk about what that looks like. So first off, we need 2 hypotheses where we're talking about a relationship. So to write that, you could kind of use this little kind of format, this template that I've given you guys. There will be a relationship between variable and variable. So you could plug in any 2 variables there that you want. Remember, a variable is something that varies in its response. It's usually numerical, right? Like on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel today? That's a variable. It's a way of asking a question and getting back a variable. So you need to have 2 variables and say, hey, there'll be a relationship between these 2. That's one way of making a hypothesis. The second way is finding a difference between 2 groups. So group 1 will have a higher variable than group 2. So just kind of filling in this template will give you guys some working hypotheses that you can actually dive into. So just use this template to write your 4 hypotheses. And you guys can come up with whatever groups and variables that you want. So let's look at some examples right now. I think that'll be helpful. If we could look at some examples and see what this looks like. So let's look at some good examples. There will be a relationship between, okay, so we're going to be looking at 2 variables here. Video game usage and social anxiety. Those are 2 things that vary amongst people. So we need to come up with a way of measuring video game usage. Maybe we'll say hours per week, and then we need to measure social anxiety. How socially anxious are you on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Something like that. That's how we'll ask the questions, and that's how we'll address this hypothesis. Those are 2 variables. Another variable relationship example would be, there will be a relationship between golf handicap and frequency of batting cage visits. Maybe you feel, the hand-eye coordination, the old baseball is going to translate to golf, right? So you could ask them, how many times do you go to the batting cage per year, right? And then you could then ask, what is your golf handicap, which is also going to be a number that varies. Let's go down now to some examples of differences between groups. Boys will have a higher anxiety score than girls. Those are 2 groups. You have boys and you have girls. Those are 2 groups. It's not something that varies. And then you have anxiety score, right? That's the variable that we're looking at. And we're going to say boys will have a higher average anxiety score than girls. And then again, the last one here, people who play golf will have watched more movies than people who play baseball, right? So we have people who play golf, that's one group of participants, and then people who play baseball, that's another group of participants. The variable we're measuring here is number of movies watched per year, say, and we're gonna say the people who play golf have a higher average number of movies watched per year. Let's look at some examples of what not to do now, some not so good hypotheses, and kind of talk about why. The first one is probably the most common thing that I see you guys go. There will be a relationship between gender and GPA. this is not a relationship question because gender is not something that's necessarily on a scale. Right? Usually people identify with one or more different genders or sexual orientations. So that's creating groups. So when you ask a gender question, most often you're going to see that on surveys you've taken as multiple choice questions with a bunch of different answers, right? So that's creating groups. So we can't find a relationship between something that creates groups and GPA. So this is where you would go and make a groups question, a difference between groups hypothesis as opposed to this one. Next, there will be a relationship between sports, the sport you play, and the number of friends you have, right? Again, the sport you play is putting you into a group, right? So, even asking the number of sports you play is kind of a grouping question when you think about the way high school sports are structured. Most people will play 0, 1, 2, or 3 sports. That's kind of the way it goes with the different seasons and what you're able to, take part in. So when you ask that question, again, that's creating a group. Number of friends, definitely more of a variable. That one's fine. But sport played is creating a group, so that's not a relationship hypothesis. Next, high GPA students will have more club involvement than low GPA students. So saying high GPA and low GPA aren't groups. GPA is a variable. It's going to vary amongst kids. So what makes a high GPA? What makes a low GPA? We don't really know. We don't know where to draw that line in the sand. So that is more of a variable and not something that's a group. Okay? And then lastly, honor students will do more homework than Regent students. This is really a good hypothesis, right? You have honor students and Regent students. Those are two groups, right? And then more homework, so we can measure that number of hours spent doing homework per week, right? We can make ourselves a nice variable there that's going to vary amongst students. Great. But this is not a good hypothesis because of the population that we are going to be surveying. You're going to be surveying students who are taking research. So we're probably, an overgeneralization here, looking at a majority of people taking honors classes and the minority of people taking Regents classes. So you're looking at not an even balance. It's going to be very hard to find an even balance there. So maybe not a good hypothesis because of the population that you're surveying. So let's talk about how to create variables and how to measure them. So you guys need to go now, once you have your hypotheses in place, design the questions that are going to allow you to answer that hypothesis. You've got to measure variables and you've got to create groups in your survey. So you guys are all going to be making a short survey to answer all 4 of your hypotheses. And what we're going to do is tomorrow in class, you guys are going to, well, I guess today, because I'm filming this, I'm filming this now on Tuesday. So when I say tomorrow, I mean Wednesday, but you're probably not going to watch this till Wednesday. So today, what you need to do is create a Google form with all of your questions. One person in the class should, actually, I'm just going to say, you know what, Taya is the kind of person who would do this. So Taya, you're going to make a Google Doc for everybody to put links to their survey on. Every other group, you guys are going to create your survey and you're going to put it on the document that Taya posts on Google Classroom. Both of you, all of you guys make sure, so Taya, make sure that document is editable by everyone. And then everyone else, make sure when you give out that survey, make sure everybody can click that link. Make sure the permissions are set correctly. So you're going to create your form with your questions. So now let's talk about making those questions. When measuring a variable, use a scale. So you'll see these scales on all kinds of surveys that you've taken for the school or maybe other things outside of school, but they're always on a 1 to 5 scale. This is called a Likert scale, and this is a scientifically designed scale that we use. Pretty much you see this in pretty much everything political, right? Strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. It's a 5-point scale going across. So you guys want to create a scale when measuring variables, okay? So if you're asking how anxious somebody is, give it a scale of 1 to 5. Make sure on the Google form that you show, what does 1 mean? Is 1 really anxious or not anxious? What does that mean? You can label that in Google Forms and make sure you do that, okay? Use metrics per unit time. This is a little bit more complicated, but if you say, you know, how many clubs do you take part in? That's not going to vary too much. But how many hours do you spend a week in club meetings or working on clubs is something that will vary more. You're going to have to use a write-in question for this, right? So when you do this, you want to make sure that you're specifying what the time interval is, right? What is the unit of time that we're looking at? So hours per week, meetings per year, occurrences per day. What are we doing to specify that time to make sure that everybody who's answering this question understands exactly how you want that question answered? So use metrics per unit time when you're doing this, use a write-in question, and use response validation for the write-in questions. If you click on the 3 dots when creating a questions in Google Form, there's a little pull-down menu and you'll see response validation there. In response validation, you could say, I want a number. So somebody can't type THREE for 3, they actually have to put the number 3, which is going to make it a lot easier to analyze later on. So make sure you're using response validation for your questions. And again, lastly, be mindful of the population you're surveying, guys. These are all going to be freshman science research students taking this. So be mindful of that population and make sure that the variables that you're putting in there are going to vary, that these hypotheses are things that are gonna vary in that population, right? So one common thing here is GPA. A lot of you guys love to do things with what's your average in school and how much homework do you do? Great. High school research students, you guys are all great students. You are not gonna get a big range in GPA here, guys. So please keep that in mind. I would definitely encourage you to think of things other than GPA to do. I know it's a very popular one, but think of some other stuff that's going to actually vary amongst people. You can be creative here. You guys took the survey last year. There was some random stuff on there. I think some of you even took a quiz on your knowledge of soccer. I don't know if you recall that. But you guys took a quiz on your knowledge of soccer and your score on that quiz was a variable number. So that was a really cool one. Those are the kind of things you guys can think of and can do. Now let's talk about how to create groups. This is a little easier. For the most part, just make a multiple choice question, but kind of like we talked about earlier with gender, make sure you're inclusive, make sure you give you know, everybody a box that they can check or they can put in an other box. And if you're using write-in questions where people are going to type the answer, be very wary of doing that. Using write-in questions for variables is fine because it's going to vary. You're going to have lots of different options for typing in numbers, right? But with groups, it's a little more difficult because you can't just say, you can't use response validation to say, like, give me a number, right? They're going to be typing words. So in this case, like, you can use a write-in question and then go through and code for it later, which means go through every response and be like, okay, this is a 3, this is a 3, this is a 2, this is a 2, and this is a 3, and create groups that way. Or you can just be very wary of using write-in questions. Use multiple choice questions, use pull-down questions, so that way you're always getting the group correctly. And lastly, again, be mindful of the population Don't ask, what science class are you taking? Physics, chemistry, or living environment? They're freshmen, guys. Everybody's taking living environment. There might be like 1 or 2 people that are not because of other circumstances, like going to a different school before Pelham, but everybody else is taking living environment. So not a good way to create groups. Make sure you're thinking about the population when you're doing this. So here's what I want you guys to do. Put together your 4 hypotheses. From your 4 hypotheses, develop a Google form with the questions needed to answer that hypothesis. Taya is going to create a Google Doc and post it on Classroom. Everybody is going to put their survey link on there. In class, you are going to go in and take everyone's survey. And when you do that, I want you to be as annoying as possible. Try to think about what they're asking and go, how can I break this? If they ask, how many hours do you spend on homework? Can I put in a negative number? Try to put in a negative number. Make sure that they did their response validation so that this survey is working as intended and is going to give results as intended. So I want you guys to do that. I want you to go through every single person's. So everyone from both classes should go through every group survey. And I want you guys to do that in class. And then I would like you to spend some time revising your questions. Okay, and then what you are going to do is you are then going to submit this to me via a benchmark on Classroom on a Google Doc with your hypotheses and the questions you're going to ask. Then I'm going to take your questions from the Google Doc and I'm going to put them in one giant survey, and we're going to give that to the freshmen and hopefully get that out next week. So that's what you guys need to be doing in class here. And while we're doing this, you can always be working on your mentor search. You can always be reading, okay? Be looking up articles for people that you think are potential mentors and be reading those articles, guys. Keep getting familiar with that field. Keep pushing yourselves to learn more and read those articles. All right, so on that note, that does it for today's video. I'll see you guys soon, man. It's almost Thanksgiving. I'll be back after Thanksgiving. So I'll see you guys soon, and we'll have individual meetings to talk about the mentor search stuff as soon as I get back. That'll be the first thing on the agenda. So without further ado, let's get out of here. See ya.